The gates screamed open, and heat rolled out like a furnace breath. Ash drifted through cathedral-tall pillars plated in embered brass. A mountain of coins hissed as they settled under a distant footstep. On that throne of knives lounged a king in volcanic iron and crowns. I walked alone, leather creaking, wrists scarred with old shackles. Across from me knelt a blue-skinned woman, eyes bright and unbowed. Her braids glittered with wire and bone. A history braided in pain. Around us, lords of smoke whispered odds and weighed my bones. I knelt, offering a single chain of gold, and asked to bargain blood. The king's laughter clanged, a timpani struck by a giant's hand. "Human," he said, "you gamble in a hall built to break gamblers." I said that chains bind warriors or empires depending on the wearer. I said I brought one chain, but would earn 10,000 by victory. He studied the woman, then me, as if measuring the distance between. "Win 3 trials," he decreed, "and both your lives unshackle. Fail once, and the gold becomes your grave and her collar." The court roared, coins avalanched. Fireflies of slag floated upward. The woman's gaze cut through the heat and landed steady on mine. Her name, I learned, was Ciela of the Azure Constellary. Her people sang maps into crystal and charted storms of space. Here she was called Trophy, seer and unspent ransom of a war. Her wrists were ringed with humming metal that tasted of ozone. She asked why a human bled for strangers in a strangling palace. "Because strangers made me," I said, "by not saving me first." Memory lifted the old arena, the crowd, the collar, the knives. I told her a chain is also a promise, if both ends agree. She nodded once, and something unspoken tightened between us. They led us through galleries of defeated banners and bones. Smith, branded by comets, inspected my battered gauntlets. He smirked at the leather, then handed me alloy like night frost. "Gift of the court," he said, "so you fail without excuses." Ciela touched the hilt and it rippled with quiet blue light. "Your iron is obedient," she murmured. "Teach it to defy." We spoke in quick conspiracies, stitching a strategy from scraps. I would fight. She would read the room like a star. Chart. We would both gamble, but only one of us could fall. The first trial began in a sunless pit paved with mirrors. A beast stalked there, hooded in smoke, listening for fear. Above, nobles rattled goblets. The king tapped a clawed ring. Ciela's voice braided into my earpiece like cool midnight rain. "Left wall whispers," she breathed. "Glass hides a second mouth." I bellied under breath and turned panic into measured steps. When the beast lunged, my blade met it where echoes lied. The mirrors shattered. The mouth behind the wall screamed. I rose bleeding, triumphant, while gold hissed like rain. We slept, if you call it sleep, in a cell with a skylight of fire. The ceiling pulsed with molten veins that mimicked a heartbeat. Ciela traced constellations in the glow and renamed them Mercy. I told her of oceans back home where storms broke like hymns. She taught me 3 words in her tongue for courage without witness. I gave her one in mine for hope that refuses to sit down. "Why risk this?" she asked again, softer, with the room listening. "Because someone once bet on me," I said, "and won." "Then let's raise the stakes," she answered and smiled. At court, rumors scuttled like armored insects under plates. The king's. "Steward," a many-jointed thing slid near our corner. "Champions grow bored," it clicked. "Perhaps a wager entertains." I offered the chain again, coiled on my palm like captured sunlight. "Double or nothing," I said, and the court inhaled as a single lung. 2 trials in 1 day. Winner takes crowns. Loser takes silence. The steward's eyes danced, then vanished to feed the throne. Ciela pressed a cool palm to my forearm and mapped breathing. "We can outthink boredom," she whispered, "but not pride." The second trial unfolded on bridges woven of sparking wire. Wind clawed upward from a chasm where engines slept and dreamt. Opposite me stood a duelist with 6 arms and no patience. "Cut the bridges," nobles shouted, hungry for falling stories. Sailors. Voice guided my footfalls, counting the rhythm of coils. 3, then pause. 2, then faint. The 5th wire hums lies. I let the rush take me, but never gave it the wheel. Steel met steel, then met air, then met his overreach. He tumbled, pride first, swallowed by the machine's purr. Coins avalanched again, drowning the king's boots in light. He watched me the way a storm watches a torch. Curious, annoyed. "One trial remains," he said. "But my court prefers a spectacle." "Name it," I answered, voice steady, knees not entirely honest. "Gamble all," he purred. "Your freedom, her visions, and my crown." The court ruptured with laughter that sounded like tearing silk. Ciela tilted her head, star bright, reading the hidden gears. "Except," she breathed, "because his crown fears its own weight." I nodded, and the hall leaned forward as if gravity had moved. Preparation became a language we spoke with hands and silence. Ciela drew sigils on my blade that bent heat away from bone. I practiced losing and practiced stopping before the drop. The smith returned, placed a blue shard in my open palm, Starmote, he said. Ashamed of the hope inside the gift, I threaded it into my gauntlet and felt a colder courage. We ate bread that tasted of iron and laughed without jokes. Outside, the city sang the low song of occupied hearts. Inside, 2 prisoners plotted an empire's stutter. Morning broke like a hammer on a bell of glass. The arena swelled from the throne room like a blooming wound. On a dais of bones, the king lifted a blade shaped like verdict. Opposite him, I rolled my shoulders and tasted copper prayers. Ciela stepped behind me, cool as orbit, warm as breath. "Remember?" she said. "He believes the court is his weapon. Make the court believe it's yours," she finished, and withdrew. I faced the crown and saw beneath it tired human hunger. Then the drums began, and the gamble finally stood up. He came fast, heavy, practiced, imperial as a falling door. Slid under the first blow, felt the throne's gravity drag it. Sparks fled the blade. The crowd inhaled, smelling changing weather. Ciela's calculations rang through my bones like tuning forks. I struck not at armor, but at the rhythm between. His steps, the Starmote flared. My gauntlet sang against obsidian edge. We traded failures and small victories and unspent secrets. Gold shifted behind him like a tide unsure of the moon. I smiled, because tides can be taught new shores. The court loved blood, but adored audacity, even more. I gave them feints that bowed like courtiers and bites that surprised. Ciela gave them silence, letting the absence sharpen every sound. The king gave them certainty and found it suddenly expensive. When his blade rose, mine rose earlier. When he paused, I spoke. "End this with a promise," I said, voice breaking on purpose. "Free her," I added, "and I build you bridges to the stars." He hesitated, crown tilting under invisible arithmetic. That was when the first crack ran through the throne. Night found us unbroken but dented, and the city restless. I tasted ash and victory and the fear of winning too soon. Ciela charted our path on the ceiling soot with her fingertip. 3 corridors. 2 allies, 1 faith, she said, smiling sideways. I asked if her people would forgive me trading gold for blood. "They will forgive the result," she said, "and argue the method." We laughed quiet, the kind that hurts a little when it stops. Outside, drums faltered as rumors gnawed through discipline. Inside, we sharpened hope and fed it steel. Dawn dragged its iron across the horizon, and the court woke sore. The steward skittered. "Back with scrolls dripping wax and wagers. Your odds have teeth," it clicked, "but teeth sometimes break. I rapped my knuckles, memorized the bruise map as scripture. Saila retied her braids, each knot a compass to somewhere safe. She touched my shoulder and the room became bearable again. Whatever happens, she said, let the story make liars of them. I asked who them were, and she said, anyone who profits fear. We walked toward the throne, 2 debts ready to collect. The final prelude trial was sprung like a hunter's trap of music. Dancers with knives wove patterns meant to carve me into art. Their footsteps matched bells buried under the floor for timing. Saela closed her eyes and counted galaxies in reverse. Second bell after the high note, she said. Now cut the rhythm. I stomped. The bell missed a heartbeat. The pattern collapsed. Knives forgot their choreography and remembered physics. I survived with a new scar and a very old grin. The court applauded, uneasy, like thunder unsure it is thunder. We stood again before the throne that pretended to be a mountain. The king's shadow reached us before his words long and cold. Last wager, he intoned. Win, and you rewrite our history. Lose, and you disappear into it, he added, merciful as winter. Saela lifted her chin, and the crown seemed suddenly smaller. Kings borrow history, she said. Nations lend it with interest. The court murmured, discovering poetry in a place of knives. I lifted my blade and let the star mote hum like a promise. Somewhere very far away, the future leaned closer to hear. He offered terms that glittered like baited hooks in clear water. No ambush, no champions, no executioners behind the curtains. Only him and me and the weight of eyes and the price of pride. Gold had pooled at the dais like sunlight pretending to be safe. Saela squeezed my hand once, and all the noise became shaped. Win, she said. And this hall learns how humans keep vows. Lose, she added, and I finish the vow without you. I nodded, grateful and terrified in equal honest measures. The king smiled, and the court's breath grew razor thin. We stepped into a circle traced in ash and old oaths. A hush fell that made the fire sound like rain on glass. He saluted, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of respect. I returned it, because I was taught to honor beginnings. The first clash rang, like a bell tolling for someone else. Saela's eyes were planets. My fear was a moon that obeyed them. The king pressed. I yielded. He overreached. I answered. Steel drew a bright line across his pauldron, and truth leaked out. For the first time, the crown felt heavier than the sword. The crowd surged, scenting a fracture in their favorite mythology. Banners stirred as if caught in a wind from a different story. The steward froze, quills suspended like insects in amber. Saela spoke one word in her language that meant 3 things. It meant now and together. And remember who started this. I drove forward, not for blood, but for the hinge of the moment. The hinge screamed, and the door between futures swung open. Coins slid like fleeing fishes around the king's steps. He looked down, and, in looking, lost the exact fight he needed. The circle widened, or else we did. Impossible to tell. I heard the city outside adopt a new tempo in the stones. Every strike we traded rewrote one sentence on 1,000 lips. Saela's presence steadied me like a hand under a drowning throat. I fainted low, rose high, and clipped. The crown's black lattice. It rang, hollow, betraying the emptiness it pretended to fill. A murmur bloomed into a rumor, into a certainty wearing boots. The king faltered, found himself mortal, and hated the mirror. I pressed, and the court leaned. With me, as if pulled by tide, he broke away, retreating not from blade, but from belief. The throne glared behind him, all blades and borrowed terror. Saela stepped to the edge of the circle and looked at everyone. Witness, she said, and the word became law in that room. I saw the opening, then, the small mercy shaped like an answer. Yield, I said to the king, and reign the harder way. The court flinched, sensing the sharper edge in Mercy's sheath. The king's jaw worked, wrestling a lifetime of simpler answers. He did not yield, yet, but the crown wobbled toward wisdom. The circle held, ash bright as frost on coal. We moved like answers, searching for their questions. The king's blade wrote furious cursive in the air. I read it wrong once and paid a red tithe. Scilla's breath steadied, a metronome of distant seas. She whispered timing, not orders, never, chains. I let the star mote pull heat from my fear. He hammered down. I slipped where gravity blinked. The crowd learned to exhale between possibilities. He charged to finish, crown low like a battering moon. I sidestepped and gave the moment new ankles. Metal howled. Sparks fled like startled fireflies. Our shadows fenced faster than our bodies could. Scylla said one word that meant tilt the story. I tilted, and the story poured toward us. Gold slid, a bright river changing its bed. The throne groaned, remembering older owners. The king heard it and hated the memory. He tried for spectacle, the kind that forgives rulers. A feral roar, a leap, the promise of simplicity. I denied spectacle and offered craft instead. 3 small cuts in a line that became choice. Power bled ambition, not life. The court watched. Scylla lifted her hand and silence took a knee. Yield, I said again, because mercy is louder twice. The crown shivered like glass deciding its future. He refused, and the future smiled with sharp teeth. We broke apart, then back, then through pattern. He swung a grief he mistook for authority. I answered with a hope I had practiced daily. Starmote flashed. My gauntlet rang a bell of truth. The king stumbled. The throne leaned without moving. Somewhere, chains unlearned their favorite song. Scylla met my gaze and set the next star. End it gentle, she breathed. So it stays ended. I struck, soft as a door closing on winter. He fell to a knee, not from pain, but math. The court inhaled, expecting lightning or knives. I sheathed my sword and offered him a hand. He stared like a man at an unfamiliar bridge. Stand, I said, and we both survive ourselves. His fingers twitched, then reached, then decided yes. When our hands met, the hall remembered being human. Gold rustled, relieved to stop pretending to be power. Scylla exhaled a constellation into the room. Night. Arrived wearing rumors for jewelry. The city vibrated, a string newly tuned. The king's hand lingered in mine like a truce. He stood, older and newer at once, unarmed. Name your price, he said, voice iron without cruelty. Free her, I answered, and listen when she speaks. Scylla stepped forward, the chain singing as it opened. The lock sighed. The metal forgot the shape of wrists. Freedom landed between us and chose to stay. The steward hissed, "Law requires spectacle for closure." Then change the law, Scylla said, almost kindly. The court shifted, unsure how to sit with gentleness. I unspooled my gold chain and made it a line. Cross it, I told the nobles, if you choose tomorrow. Some crossed at once. Some waited for permission. The king watched, learning the geometry of consent. The throne dimmed, fewer knives, more memory. Heat softened without losing its courage. We walked the city as moonless lanterns. People opened shutters and arguments simultaneously. Children asked if the crown could apologize. Blacksmiths weighed steel against bread and chose both. Scylla listened the way rain listens to roofs. She mapped repairs no architect could afford. I learned which alleys remembered my old footsteps. They forgave me by asking for better patrols. We promised what our hands could actually build. At dawn, we returned to the hall of burned hymns. The king waited with parchment, not chains. "Councils," he said, not courtiers pretending otherwise. "Tribunes by lot, audits by sunlight, oaths by year." "Start with markets," Sayela added. "End with schools." He nodded like a student who wanted the hard homework. We wrote a day long and blunt with usefulness. Gold moved to vaults, then to wages, then to roofs. The throne watched, unthreatened by jobs well done. By dusk, the city hummed a different electricity. The king approached with private worry disguised. "What of the war your people sing about?" he asked. Sayela's gaze tilted toward a sky she could almost see. "My charts say a storm," she replied, "and an opening." I felt old shackles itch like weather forecasting bones. "Then we prepare," I said, "and we choose our allies." The king looked at both of us and chose aloud. "My court serves whoever serves the future best." The envoy arrived like a bruise on velvet. Ships dark as unlit mirrors ringed the horizon. A herald with teeth of patents offered terms. Surrender maps, surrender seers, surrender questions. Sayela smiled the way cliffs smile at bored waves. "I decline," she said, "with interest and invention." I unrolled the chain on the table, map thin. "3 trials once freed us," I said, remembering heat. 3 bridges now will bind our peace to motion. Bridge 1 would be trust that survives audits. Bridge 2 would be roads where soldiers aren't tolls. Bridge 3 would be sky corridors under public ledger. The herald laughed, a noise practiced in better rooms. He offered siege packaged as partnership, shiny and cheap. The king listened and learned the shape of refusal. "Take our answer," he said, "and take the long road." Cannons woke in the envoy's shadow like bad habits. Sayela touched my shoulder. "Time to gamble honestly." We split the problem into talents and weather. The king secured granaries and debt forgiveness. Sayela seeded the sky with kites that weren't kites. I trained dock workers into a choir of timing. The smith tuned my gauntlet for talking to storms. The steward counted refugees like treasure to be guarded. Children practiced sirens that sounded like hope. Old enemies brought soup and brooms instead of knives. The city rehearsed survival until it felt like culture. When the siege tightened, our bridges stood invisible. Ledgers pulsed, corridors whispered, trust held. The envoy cut trade and found our hunger rehearsed. They cut light and found our night self-luminous. They cut rumor and found our stories redundantly true. Sayela's kites sang. Winds braided into answers. Sparks wrote messages on the clouds. Not this time. I watched cannons blink, confused by irrelevance. War sputtered, too expensive to lie about anymore. In the lull, the herald requested parley, with knives. We met between walls on a carpet of unbroken bread. "Who are you without your crown?" he asked the king. "A student," the king said, and did not apologize. "Who are you without your collar?" he asked me. "A gambler who prefers carpentry," I answered. "And you without your charts?" he asked Sayela. "A storm with vocabulary," she said and stood. He left with nothing easy to report upward. Rumors swelled into fleets anyway, as rumors do. Skies bruised, drums learned a faster grammar. We tightened buckles on plans and people both. The king opened vaults and closed loopholes. Sayela opened observatories and closed nightmares. I opened doors before fear could lock them. Children drew maps of safe wells and loud neighbors. Mothers stored lullabies in public libraries. The city inhaled and did not forget to exhale. The first bombardment fell like sloppy percussion. We counted the beats and learned its teacher. Kites pulled lightning into jars for later power. Bridges woke, moving goods like disciplined rivers. The chain on my wrist warmed, remembering bargaining. I walked the walls and traded jokes for composure. Sayela spoke to winds, then to turbines. then to crowds. The king spoke to losses and named them not shame. The envoy spoke to threats and heard their echo fade. On the third night, a breach tried to be a story. It found instead a neighborhood with choreography. Bakers became sappers, teachers became signal smoke. We arrived late only in the enemy's version. Ciela pointed once, and an alley grew teeth. My gauntlet rang, and doors opened out of sequence. The king swung a hammer labeled receipt of taxes. The breach apologized by ceasing to exist. Afterward, soup tasted like punctuation at last. The herald returned, voice less certain, cape less new. "Your city defies economics," he said, almost admiring. "No," Ciela answered. "It practices them completely. Costs include trust. Benefits include tomorrow." He blinked as if math had raised its hand. "What do you want?" I asked, tired but generous. He looked at the crown, then at the not crown. "Terms I can survive," he said, unexpectedly human. "Then bring us the person who can say yes." They brought not a person but a calculus, an admiral made of contracts and cold applause. She wore a uniform tailored by surrendered cities. Her eyes measured us for efficient forgetting. Ciela met that gaze with an atlas of unsold futures. "We will win," the admiral said, "by attrition." "Then attrit yourself first," the king replied mildly. "I place the chain between us like a quiet law. We bet on people," I said, "and we collect." Negotiations stalled on a reef of professional pride. Cannons spoke when words got stage fright again. We answered with bridges, not insults, and endured. The admiral learned nothing while counting everything. Her fleet grew bored and made mistakes in public. Ciela's kites caught those mistakes like gentle fishermen. We returned prisoners before their anger cooled. We returned letters with their sarcasm intact. We returned fire only where it could turn to food. One ship defected, then two, then a slow rain. The admiral called it treason. We called it curiosity. Dock workers welcomed sailors as if debt were weather. Children's sirens became parades in better keys. The herald watched, astonished by logistics as mercy. The king drafted amnesty that felt like arithmetic. I drafted training that tasted like paychecks. Ciela drafted a sky road contract no crown could cheat. The envoy's maps began erasing their own arrows. Cornered, the admiral performed spectacle for investors. A night raid all Nash and phosphor and stock price. We met it with lanterns that refused to be afraid. Ciela cracked the storm open like a numbered safe. Wind pivoted, sails buckled, engines choked politely. My gauntlet sang, the star mote hummed. Its old hymn. I leapt a gap that thought it had me measured. The king arrived with carpenters and carried the wounded. The raid realized it had accidentally funded our morale. Morning assembled itself out of leftover thunder. White flags bloomed like unemployed ghosts. The admiral stared at a future she could not monetize. "Yield," Ciela said, the word humane and precise. "Serve," the king added, "what you once priced wrongly." I offered the chain for the last time, palm open. "Make this a contract you won't regret," I said. She touched it, perhaps to reject, perhaps to learn. It warmed, because even iron believes occasionally. We wrote the treaty on tables used for ordinary bread. Clause by clause, scaffolding for a better boredom. Reparations paid in apprenticeships, not ash. Transit rights pegged to school attendance, not fear. Fleet maintenance repurposed into flood walls. A new council to audit promises and their shadows. The admiral signed, a neat signature learning humility. The herald smiled for the first time that was real. The city unclenched and remembered how to sing. Peace arrived with chores and glorious dullness. Markets relearned laughter that spends well. Workshops argued about beautiful bolts again. The throne became a chair anyone could scold. The king wore it lightly, a student borrowing chalk. Ciela built observatories shaped like questions. I taught recruits to gamble only on each other. Our bridges carried grain, gossip, and grandmothers. The sky road lit, a necklace no neck could own. Then came the visitors with honest hands. Neighboring towns, old rivals, cautious friends. They brought recipes and audits and imperfect songs. We traded not just goods but better stubbornness. Children invented games about treaties and teamwork. Sailors told jokes that translated themselves kindly. The steward retired 3 laws and 3 nightmares. We celebrated by fixing sewers before fireworks. It felt like the right order of miracles. On a quiet evening, we climbed the old wall. Sunset burned coins into the river politely. Ciela leaned into wind that remembered her charts. "You could leave now," she said, "without breaking." "I could," I answered, "but I'd rather build." She smiled, constellation by constellation, slow. "The gamble changed you," she observed, not unkind. "It paid out," I said, "in work and witnesses." We watched lanterns become a thesis on home. The king joined us, carrying bread wrapped warm. "Councils argue," he reported, "and no one vanishes." "I dream in ledgers," he added, bemused at himself. Ciela passed him a page of stars and scaffolding. He nodded at futures that would cost him sleep. "You can leave," he told me gently, "with thanks." "I'll stay," I said, "until staying is the braver thing." We tore bread and fed gulls that didn't ask permission. The city exhaled. A long answer finished at last. At night's edge, I walked past the horde's old place. Only floor remained, polished by new traffic. I set the gold chain down and left it there. Not as a monument, just a tool for the next hands. Ciela's shadow joined mine and made a third. "Tomorrow?" she asked, meaning several projects. "Yes," I said, "because vows age best when used." The star mote dimmed, satisfied like a quiet hearth. We went to sleep in a city that finally trusted morning. Seasons turned pages. We wrote margins joyfully. The treaty matured into customs and muscle memory. Ships arrived with books that smelled like brave rain. Courts held trials where truth wore working clothes. Markets hid fewer knives and more scholarships. Ciela mentored seers who loved maps and mistakes. I mentored rookies who loved drills and fruit pies. The king mentored himself, hardest syllabus alive. The throne collected dust and compliments evenly. One winter, the admiral returned without fleet. She carried a toolbox and a question for work. "Where am I most useful?" Her letter asked plainly. "In the floodplain," we wrote back. "Bring boots." She did, and learned mud's excellent pedagogy. We built levees named after arguments we survived. Farmers told stories that did not need villains. Children asked why uniforms used to scare them. We answered carefully and mostly with chores. Spring storm tried to be a referendum. Rivers swelled, proud of their temporary crowns. We swung sandbags like votes that counted. Kites flew, pulling lightning politely aside. Bridges flexed and smiled with adult confidence. The city kept breathing, on purpose and on time. When water receded, applause felt practical. Soup lines formed to celebrate, not to mourn. The envoy sent seedlings rather than speeches. In summer, a caravan brought distant news. A human colony broken by corporate weather. A plea for charts, for fairness, for a mule. Ciela's eyes caught, fire like responsible stars. "We can help," she said, already making lists. The king nodded, calculating ships and leave time. I checked rosters and found volunteers smiling. The steward inked budgets that trusted results. The city said yes, the way lungs say air. We launched under kites that wished us luck. Sky road lanes opened like well-taught doors. Our convoy glittered with ordinary promises. Dock workers waved banners sewn from old laws. Children shouted taxes are love, half mocking. I laughed because the joke worked both ways. Ciela stood at the prow and counted solutions. The king saluted, from a chair no longer lonely. We sailed toward trouble carrying tomorrow's toolkit. The colony moored in a desert startled by glass. Stormbreakers lay shattered like bad grammar. A boardroom dome flickered, selling pre-approved hope. We unpacked water, audits, and respectful stubbornness. Saela read the wind, then the contracts, then the faces. The king read the room and found a union forming. I read the threats and taught them smaller alphabets. The admiral read herself and chose to stay kind. Together we revised a sentence that hurt everyone. The board tried to purchase our patience by habit. They waved clauses like decorative swords at soup. Saela exposed the hidden costs with lantern arithmetic. The king offered debt swaps that smelled like dignity. I demonstrated how a blockade loses to neighbors. The admiral quietly trained their guards in ethics. Workers watched and relearned how to be loud. Children discovered questions shaped like ladders. A new council convened in a converted warehouse. We left only after the boring meetings worked. Markets reopened without feudal perfumes. Stormbreakers learned to listen, not merely stand. Schools taught weather and budget side by side. Kites stitched alerts into cloud fabric politely. The board signed away its right to starve people. They sulked, then adapted, then took credit badly. We clapped anyway, because grace scales well. The colony breathed like a citizen, not a client. Home welcomed us with arguments and fruit. Someone had painted the throne a soft blue. The king pretended to scold and secretly thanked. Saela unveiled charts that glowed with future chores. I hung my gauntlet on a peg labeled open. The admiral built a school for professional humility. Children enrolled adults and graded gently. We held a festival where audits won prizes. The night ended with dishwashing that felt holy. Later on the wall, we counted lanterns again. "Did the gamble end?" Saela asked, almost teasing. "It keeps paying dividends," I said honestly. She took my hand, gold light catching in braids. The city below us murmured like a satisfied sea. The chain lay in the hall, waiting for new bargains. The throne dozed, proud of being almost unnecessary. The stars arranged themselves into working diagrams. We slept, and morning arrived exactly on time. Years taught us to greet problems with welcome kits. New neighbors arrived wearing disagreements politely. We standardized kindness without ruining its surprise. The Sky Road expanded, tolls paid, in service hours. Courts exported judges and imported recipes. The king retired once, then returned as professor. Saela became folklore while staying exacting. I built a guild for gamblers of the common good. Our children learned how to argue like architects. One autumn, a messenger brought darker math. A mining conglomerate arming a moon against truths. Silence contracts, hired myths, unlicensed gravity. We packed again. Slower now, better now, kinder. The admiral smiled, a veteran's small, bright smile. The king kissed the chair and said, "Hold my homework." Saela threaded star motes into community radios. I polished the chain until it remembered oceans. We sailed not to conquer but to tutor power. On that moon, boardrooms had teeth and chandeliers. Their king wore contracts like pauldroned roses. He laughed at our bridges and our public ledgers. "Gamble," I offered, because language loves symmetry. 3 trials, Saela added, but scored by citizens. The admiral counted exits and converted them to doors. Our rival agreed, sure of spectacle rescuing him. Spectacle arrived, late, and wearing our uniforms. The trials became workshops, and he lost on purpose. When treaties settled, Dust wrote congratulations on boots. We returned with fewer enemies and more chores. Home looked taller as if standing on its own shoulders. The throne had a child sitting in it, reading. We bowed and asked for notes on our performance. She graded us A- for missing 2 meetings. We laughed and fixed the meetings before supper. Ciela's charts unfurled like harvest. The city ate and argued and washed and sang. One evening near winter, I found the chain again, its links remembered, hands I'd forgotten to be. I looped it over my wrist, not as property, as a reminder that promises are engineered things. Ciela joined me, braid catching lamplight kindly. "The court saved itself," she murmured, pleased. "With help," I said, not modest, just accurate. We walked through warm arguments toward tomorrow. Behind us, the throne dreamed of empty schedules. At last, if there is such a word for peace, we stood in the hall where gold became bridges. The king, older, brighter, thanked the room aloud. Citizens answered, unafraid to interrupt royalty. Ciela spoke last and shortest. "Keep each other." I lifted the chain and the city finished the sentence. Together we hung it above the door as curriculum. Anyone entering touched it and promised small, real vows. The gamble ended by becoming everyone's habit.